For centuries, humans have been growing alongside our botanical brethren. Our histories have mixed and mingled to bring us modern medical marvels, faded folklore, and everything in between. Of course, in order to understand the plant, we have to start with its roots. I'm M. Grubner Gaddis, and this is Rooted. Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Rooted, where this week we're getting a little sappy about our favorite tree, maple. Whether you know them for their bright fall leaves, twirly seed pods, sweet syrup, or their super useful wood, this botanical ally has helped humans across the globe for centuries, and still plays an important part in cultures across the world today. Maple, or Acer, is a member of the Sapindaceae or soapberry family, with famous relatives like lychee and horse chestnut. As you might have guessed, this family gets its name to the fact that most of its members have high amounts of saponins with soap-like qualities, like making water foamy, and that is in their fruits, leaves, and roots. Maple is probably the best known and most widespread member of this family, with a native range spreading from Asia to North America. Most maples are mid-sized trees with palmate leaves, smooth bark, and distinct seeds. Most of us likely call these seeds helicopters, whirligigs, or samara if you're a liar who happen to study botany. The leaves are probably the most identifiable thing about maples, with their vibrant foliage displays each autumn. These large, showy leaves usually have 5 points, with a total of 3 to 10 veins running through them. And they aren't too picky about habitat, but do prefer somewhere with rich soil, not too much sun, and a decently long cold period, as in theory those seeds do need lower temperatures just to get started. Of course, none of that is shocking if you grew up on the east coast of the United States, where sugar maples can outnumber people in some towns. Which brings us to the other thing maples are known for and grown for, syrup. Now, normally I would save the food stuff for the end, but understanding maple syrup and how it happens is actually really important for understanding some of the folklore around it, so here we are. Maple syrup production is actually kicking off right about now in mid-January through February, and this is because the conditions are exactly right for tapping, which is kind of like a reverse IV, I guess. Essentially, maple syrup is a very concentrated sugar that the tree is currently sending up to its branches in order to give them the food they need to start pushing buds. The tree is currently sending up its stores of sugar through the cambium layer, and by tapping into the tree, we're able to siphon some of those sugars away to make syrup. There are a few ways to do it, either by boiling the sap in big syrup houses, or by essentially letting the sap freeze, pulling the ice off the top, over and over again until you get a rich, sweet syrup. But before we can move on, I have to point out that technically every time you use maple syrup, you essentially become Banicula, drinking the literal blood of plants. Just something to ponder over your next stack of pancakes. Now, let's sink our teeth into some folklore, shall we? In Anishinaabe folklore, there's a story about when man first encountered maple, or in Tinatig, growing overly reliant on the generosity of the maple people, who gave their rich syrup freely to all who laid under their protective canopy. Over time, the people grew fat and unmotivated. They started to break their promises to be good stewards of the land, instead banking on maple to provide for them. Eventually, the other plants and animals got together and decided that maple should thin their syrup, and make it sparingly, so that man could remember that maple sweetness is a gift, and one that requires effort. In another story, it was said that people learned how to make syrup from a squirrel, or after a man struck a tree with an axe on accident. Either way, the idea was that it was very cold when the tree was pierced, and as the weather began to warm up, the sap flowed out, freezing again in the night and leaving sweet beads of maple sugar in the morning. No matter how it came about, one thing is certain. The sweetness of maple and their generosity is a gift meant not to be overlooked. Across the globe, the people of Japan were also writing their own fact and fables around maple. Passing a baby through a maple's branches was said to bring a life of sweetness and luck. And this is interesting, since the next story I'm going to tell you isn't quite as happy-go-lucky. According to legend, a powerful witch-turned-yokai haunts the Maples. The story goes that once there was a beautiful young woman who was well-educated and well-respected in her village. She was known to teach other women to read, and was often turned to as the town healer. And while most of the attention she got was positive, it did eventually get her into trouble. See, one day she caught the eye of the emperor, who became transfixed by her beauty to the point of obsession. After a while of not-so-secret rendezvous, the woman falls pregnant, bringing shock and scandal to the village. Eventually, she's exiled to the mountains, where she strikes a deal with a demon god and is granted powers like shape-shifting so she can go down to the village to visit her child. For years, she mostly keeps to herself, and the village people avoid the mountains, knowing the powerful and angry Momiji haunts those hills. However, one night, a particularly powerful soldier stops by town looking for a good time. After a few drinks, he starts his search for a beautiful woman, and stumbles upon a princess who just so happens to be Momiji in disguise. Before things go too far, the soldier hears a message telling him he needs to kill Momiji, so he quickly draws his sword. But he isn't quite quick enough, and a bloody battle ensues. Eventually, Momiji does die, setting the Maples she once considered her home ablaze with a trail of her own blood. While she dies, her spirit lives on in the brilliant fall displays the Maples put on each year. And this isn't the only time Maple finds itself twisted up in love stories. In fact, in several European folk traditions, Maple was often employed in love spells, either as syrup to add sweetness and maybe mask the taste, or in wooden wands meant to help direct and concentrate magic. In medicine, Maple was often called on to offer sustenance when people were very weak, and to mask some of the gnarlier flavors of traditional herbs. I've also heard of it being used as a sort of cough suppressant, but I didn't see it in too many sources, so take that one with a grain of salt. While this stuff might not be crazy common in medicine, it has taken the culinary world by storm for centuries. Obviously, we are all very aware of maple syrup, but plenty of cuisines also call for candied maple leaves, and even just maple syrup frozen in snow to make a sort of sugary snow cone. Often, leaves are added to cookies, cakes, and other sweets to add a little extra complexity and color. In fact, Miyajima Island, just off of Hiroshima in Japan, is famous for its maple leaf confections, drawing people from all over the world to sample this famous sweet. Outside of snacks, maple is also commonly used in woodworking due to its strong wood with straight grain and pretty coloring. Honestly, I was tempted to take you on another deep dive a la grandpa trees and telephone poles from our Scots Pine episode, but there were so many things that I had to just pick a few. First and foremost, I think a lot of us picture fancy floors and furniture sets when we think of maple wood, but did you know it's also one of the most common woods for kitchen utensils, right after bamboo? On top of that, maple is also very commonly used in drum making because it gives it more even tone and clear resonance that you just can't get with poplar. Like a lot of things that we touch on for this show, I had no idea that the wooden drum community had so much wisdom and strong opinions. But I think there's a full podcast just helping us learn about different drum materials and the qualities they bring to sound. It was absolutely fascinating, but for sure something I'll let you check out on your own if you want to learn more. And of course, we kind of can't talk about maples without talking about climate change. Like I mentioned earlier, maples need long, cool periods for their seeds to stratify, and to have clear signals for when to send out near growth. The short, warmer winters with sudden cold spikes have been having a negative effect on maple populations as seedlings struggle to get started. As the earth continues to warm, we may eventually miss out on fall foliage and the joy that is maple pastries. The good news here is that there are all kinds of people out there way smarter than me actively helping to make plans to stop climate change and help maples adapt to a warmer climate. While I was living in New Mexico, I actually got to meet one of the professors working with botanists at OSU on their Big Tooth Maple project who helped develop the Mesa Glow, which is a beautiful maple adapted to thrive in New Mexico with warmer summers and shorter, less cold winters. And if you hired me to do your landscape design while I lived there, there is a very solid chance you have one if you requested autumn interest, because they're one of my favorite trees, and a good reminder of what can happen when we work together to try and help the species that have always stood to help us. Maples have always been one of my favorite trees. Between their generosity, fanfare, and easy-to-identify leaves and seeds, I think it's pretty easy to understand why. The next time you're lucky enough to see one, I hope you'll take a moment to be grateful for all the support they have given us, and to say hello. Maybe even give it a little hug or a kiss if you feel so inclined. That's all I've got for this week, but I'll be back with more tall tales and true facts next Wednesday. See you then! Until next time, be kind to yourselves, be kind to the earth, and just like a plant, drink your water. If you liked the show, please subscribe and consider leaving us a review on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or anywhere else you listen. You can also find us on Facebook and Instagram at rooted.pod. We're finally updating regularly on YouTube at rooted.podcast, and you can check out our website, rootedpod.com, for transcripts, updates, merch, and so much more. The show is written, produced, and hosted by me. I'm Grebner Gaddis, edited by Kat Friend of Friend Diagram, and our theme music was written and produced by Eric Cluxon. Rooted is a Henbane Media LLC production.